BNSf's Seattle Subdivision is one of the busiest rail lines in the Pacific Northwest. From Vancouver to Seattle, the steel rails of commerce shine from heavy use by a great variety of trains, like unit coal, grain, and crude oil. Stacked trains abound going to and from ports of Tacoma and Seattle. Numerous garbage and mixed merchandise trains frequent the line, along with an army of locals hauling everything from forest products to Boeing 737s. And did we mention passenger trains? The busy subdivision hosts 10 Amtrak trains, including 8 Cascades Talgo sets, and the Coast Starlight on its West Coast run. Plenty of Sounder commuter trains are also featured, working between Seattle and Tacoma. Every line has its scenic highlight, and for the Seattle Subdivision, it is Steilacoom, where the railroad follows the shoreline of the Puget Sound. We will show you Amtrak trains in their final months of operation along the Sound prior to being rerouted into Tacoma. Shot with a nice balance of trains and scenery, 7 Idea Productions proudly presents BNSf's Seattle Subdivision. Running 176.6 miles between Vancouver, Washington, and Seattle's King Street Station, the Seattle Subdivision was an important link for several railroads, including Northern Pacific, Great Northern, Spokane, Portland, and Seattle, Union Pacific, and even the Milwaukee Road before its demise. Mergers of the late 20th century have reduced the names of the major players down to 3: UP, BNSf, and Amtrak. We will begin at the busy Vancouver station, milepost 136.5, and head north through Kalama, Longview, Kelso, Ostrander, Vader, and up the Napavine Grade through Winlock and Napavine South. At Napavine, the railroad begins its descent into Chehalis, then Centralia, Centennial, and Nisqually, where Tacoma Rail's Lakeview line provides a connection to Tacoma via DuPont. This is the new route Amtrak trains are to be switched over to in late 2017, bypassing BNSf's route around Point Defiance. That line continues around the Puget Sound through Steilacoom and Nelson Bennett, where the railroad goes to single track through the Nelson Bennett and Ruston tunnels. Turning to the southeast, we pass Commencement Bay at Ruston and enter the busy Tacoma Yard. UP traffic splits off onto their own line at Reservation, which loosely parallels the BNSf to Black River. At Puyallup, the main line turns again in a northerly direction through Auburn and the junction with the Stampede Subdivision. Then Kent, Black River, Renton Junction, and on into Seattle, ending at King Street Station, milepost 0.0x. The soft, warm light of a red summer sunrise falls upon the Amtrak depot at Vancouver, Washington. Built in 1908 for the Northern Pacific Railroad and rebuilt 100 years later by the city of Vancouver, the depot handles 12 Amtrak trains per day. Sitting in the middle of a Y between BNSf's Fallbridge and Seattle subdivisions, the depot's northwest side serves 8 regional Cascade trains and the Coast Starlight numbers 11 and 14, running between Los Angeles and Seattle. The southeast side is reserved for the Empire Builder, running between Portland and Chicago. On a rainy afternoon, Amtrak 27 departs Vancouver for its final destination of Portland via the Fallbridge subdivision. Southwest of the depot, trains cross the Columbia River drawbridge, located at milepost 9.6 on the Fallbridge Sub. Opened in 1908, it was built by the Northern Pacific for the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle. The 2,807-foot bridge has a swing span on the Washington side, manned 24 hours a day by a bridge tender. The span is opened on average around 12 times daily, and since marine traffic have the right-of-way, trains must call the bridge tender for permission to cross. The Port of Vancouver handles over 400 ocean-going vessels annually, and numerous barges haul cargo upriver as far east as Lewiston, Idaho. With the bridge span in place, a BNSf local crosses the Columbia on its way to Vancouver Yard. Dragging a northbound manifest, UP 4324 crosses the mighty river. As it does so, it leaves the state of Oregon behind and enters Washington. As the train rolls beneath the signal bridge, it enters the Seattle Subdivision at milepost 136.5. UP trains run via trackage rights from North Portland Junction, located across the river, to Reservation in Tacoma. A former Burlington Northern GP 38-2 is tied down just south of the Vancouver Yard. A former Northern Pacific yard lies to the left of the main tracks, while the main freight yard seen here traces its routes to the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle. Vancouver handles rail traffic to and from destinations all over the Pacific Northwest, with main lines connecting Tacoma, Seattle, and Vancouver, BC, with Portland, Pasco, and Spokane. A westbound manifest enters the Vancouver Yard after making a trip through the scenic Columbia River Gorge via the Fallbridge Subdivision. Approaching us from the south is one of the 8 Amtrak Cascade passenger trains that call on Vancouver Station every day. This is Amtrak 500, a daily Eugene, Oregon to Seattle, Washington train, which is scheduled to arrive at 8:35 a.m. This morning it is right on time, as AMTK 202 leads the Talgo train set to the station for a quick stop. Amtrak's Cascades serve a 467-mile intercity rail corridor from Vancouver, BC to Eugene, Oregon, although no single train covers the entire distance. Ridership in 2016 totaled 792,481, making this Amtrak's 8th busiest route in the nation. Bringing up the rear of the train set is cab car number 90340. It was originally an F40PH, lettered AMTK 340, but has since had its prime mover and traction motors removed. Designated as an NPCU, or non-powered control unit, it serves as a control car, allowing the engineer to operate from the B end of the train. North of the busy freight yard, we find the locomotive service area on the east side of the main line. Portland area locomotive servicing was moved here by BNSf in 1996, after it closed its Hoyt Street facility near Portland Union Station. BNSf 7158 is ready to head for Tacoma and slowly makes its way into the B yard, where a fresh crew will take the train north on the main line. The Seattle sub departs Vancouver as a double-track main line. Amtrak 501 blows for a crossing at Ridgefield South. North of Ridgefield, trains cross the Lewis River on a 265-foot swing bridge built around 1908. The swing span and turntable gears still exist, even though they are no longer operational. A very weathered tender house sits abandoned on the top of the swing span, harkening back to an earlier time. From the west side, we see a southbound BNSF garbage train crossing the Lewis River in the late afternoon. Breaking the tape measure at 5,531 feet, garbage trains like this one are common on the Seattle Subdivision, heading to and from the Roosevelt landfill east of Wishram in the Columbia River Gorge. A smoky sunset silhouettes a northbound UP stack train making an evening run to Seattle. Just before sunset, BNSF 5711 North leads a Powder River Basin coal train into the night. A green signal shows at Harvest, milepost 108 on the Seattle sub for Amtrak 516, running north between Portland and Vancouver, BC. Here, the train passes the busy port of Kalama. The line here has recently been triple-tracked as part of a 7-year program in Washington state to handle increasing passenger and freight demands. BNSf 5298 leads a northbound manifest around the same curve on Main 2. Located on the shore of the Columbia River, Kalama was once known as the place where rail and water meet, according to a slogan from the 1870s. This was the terminus of the Northern Pacific Railway for a while, and the headquarters as well. Trains were ferried across the river to Oregon, until the Columbia River drawbridge was completed in Vancouver in 1908. The Port of Kalama was organized in 1919, and today hosts 2 grain terminals, a chemical plant, cedar mill, and a steel mill, most of which utilize the port's rail access, which is served by BNSf and Union Pacific. Looking across the marina, a BNSf grain shuttle powered by 2 -9 44CWs backs toward the Temco grain terminal, a common sight at Kalama. BNSf 8402 North takes a loaded coal train past Control Point, Kalama, at milepost 107.5. This train originated in the Powder River Basin and is bound for the Roberts Bay Export Terminal near Vancouver, BC. As the sign states, this access road we are shooting from is often blocked by grain trains servicing the second grain facility at Peavey. We had to wait for the right moment to get these shots, as often this view is blocked by hundreds of grain hoppers. Just before sunset, BNSf 7357 North heads through Kalama with an assortment of domestic stacks and mixed freight. A Kansas City Southern GEVO is tucked into the consist. The line goes back to double track where it crosses the Kalama River near Peavey. Amtrak 507 races south on its daily run between Seattle and Eugene, Oregon. From an overpass north of the bridge, we can look straight down the tracks into Kalama. Main 1 is on your right, while Main 2 is occupied by BNSf 3888 North as it leads a manifest toward Tacoma on a warm summer evening. The overpass gives us a view of the Steelscape Mill, just west of the main line. Sitting on 75 acres, it finishes and rolls steel coils for the construction market, and is one of the biggest employers in Kalama. As night settles in, the headline of BNSf 4412 South announces another garbage train, rolling toward Vancouver on Main 2. Amtrak 507 approaches Longview Junction on a cloudy afternoon. Note the baggage door cut into the side of cab car number 90230, often referred to as a cabbage car. At milepost 101.1, Longview Junction provides rail access to the busy port of Longview. The junction forms a Y off the recently triple-tracked main line, so trains can access the port from either direction. These vintage EMDs parked near the third leg of the Y represent the two Class 1 railroads which serve the port. A pair of Union Pacific GP38-2s are off to handle switching chores at the port, where some of its UP brethren are already hard at work. If you really want to see the port of Longview, it is best to cross to the Oregon side of the Columbia River. This view frames the port with the flat top of Mount St. Helens in the background, and the Lewis and Clark Bridge in the foreground. Operating since 1921, the Port of Longview contains 8 marine terminals, which handle commodities such as grain, fertilizers, forest products, minerals, and steel. Located 66 miles from the Pacific Ocean, the river is deep enough to handle ocean-going vessels. Washington's Cowlitz County was once known as the timber capital of the world, and the Long Bell Lumber Company mill at this site was the largest in the world during the Roaring '20s. North of Kelso at Rocky Point, this impressive wood trestle once carried the Columbia and Cowlitz Railroad, which served a Weyerhaeuser mill in Longview. Sadly, trains stopped running in 2015, and now the trestle stands as a silent backdrop above the BNSf mainline. A northbound coal train led by BNSf 5796 passes Rocky Point on its way to the Centralia power plant, around 46 miles away. It is hard to see from this angle, but it is actually passing through the Ostrander Tunnel, which burrows 1,165 feet through the hillside. Moments later, Amtrak 11, the southbound Coast Starlight, exits the tunnel. On a foggy morning in late October, we set up on the north side of the Ostrander Tunnel. Both the Columbia and Cowlitz Grade and North Pacific Avenue cross over the tracks near the tunnel bore. The earth shakes as a northbound approaches. UP 8993 leads an empty garbage train bound for Seattle. This daily train runs between Seattle and a landfill near Gillum, Oregon, located in the Columbia River Gorge near Arlington. Following the trash train, Amtrak 500 exits the Ostrander Tunnel on Main 2. Continuing north of the Longview-Kelso area, the railroad leaves the Columbia River behind, loosely following the watercourse of the Cowlitz River through the rural countryside. 2 miles north of the tunnel are the crossovers at Ostrander, milepost 93.4. Amtrak 507 to Eugene is seen again on a hot summer afternoon after running around a BNSf manifest train just north of here. Right behind the Talgo, the train in question, BNSf 3984, takes a manifest south to Vancouver on Main 2. Just out of view on Main 1, UP 5220 North had been waiting for these two southbounds to clear, since Amtrak had to run around the slower manifest. Now with a clear signal at Ostrander, two EMD SD70Ms work hard getting their stack train up to speed. Continuing north, trains cross the Toutle River near Castle Rock. Volcanic ash and mud flows from the May 18, 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens forever changed the river. Gray ash still fills its banks. Near milepost 83, the rails make a nice curve along the Cowlitz River. Southbound Amtrak 501 coasts through this beautiful fall scene on Main 1. A few minutes later, UP 8686 South rounds the same curve with containers from Seattle. South of Vader, a northbound grain shuttle crosses the Cowlitz River at milepost 81.4. The rails will soon leave the easy watercourse and ascend the Napavine Grade. It's a cold and damp October morning as we set up near the crossovers at Vader, milepost 77 on the Seattle Sub. For a long time, we could hear two trains approaching us, one from each direction, and we were hoping for a meet. A southbound garbage train appears first, gliding down Main 1 behind SD75M number 254, wearing BNSf Heritage 1 paint. Like the train we saw crossing the Lewis River, this garbage train is bound for the Roosevelt landfill. A gas generating facility there will use this waste to make electricity. A few seconds after the garbage train disappears, the lights of a northbound cut through the fog as BNSf 8211 North takes a heavy grain shuttle up the Napavine Grade. This is what Vader looks like minus the fog on a summer morning as we set up for a couple of Amtrak Talgo trains. First up is Amtrak 500 running between Eugene and Seattle. Just north of the crossovers, the train met Amtrak 501 running south from Seattle to Portland. Cab car number 90250 leads the train, painted in the colors of the professional football team, the Seattle Seahawks. There are 3 speed limits on the Seattle Subdivision: freight, passengers, and Talgos. Since Talgo train sets have the ability to lean through curves, they generally have the highest speed limit, in this case 65 miles per hour, 10 miles per hour faster than the Coast Starlight on this same curve. Between Vader and Napavine, trains climb a light grade of 0.9%. While not a mountain grade, it still gives locomotives a good workout on the 60-mile-per-hour track. At Winlock, UP 4743 South is in dynamics as it brings a stack train down the hill and past the crossovers at control point CP 72. Moving to a curve above the crossovers, UP 7498 North appears on Main 2. BNSf 3802 heads through Napavine South with a bare table train on Main 2. Bare tables may not make the list of the most desirable trains to catch, but they are part of the normal flow of traffic to and from ports and intermodal facilities, and so we document them as well. Returning to the same location in October, Amtrak 513 heads south, crossing over from Main 2 to Main 1 on its run between Vancouver, BC and Portland. The Series 8 Talgo set features a power car with a built-in cab. Although it looks a bit unusual, it negates the need for an additional cab car. It has been given the nickname Vader by some rail fans. Through the cool morning fog, BNSf 4636 North climbs the Napavine Grade with a manifest train in tow. Look closely at the trailing unit as it passes. The BN55 is a former CB&Q SD9, now rebuilt and reclassified as a TEB-C6 slug. We are in for a well-timed meet this morning. UP 9079 South takes a grain train down the hill on the number 1 track. At the top of the grade, Napavine was the site of a sawmill built by the Northern Pacific to build ties. This jail was built the year Napavine was incorporated, 1913, and sits just off the main line as a historic building. Later that day, Amtrak 468 and EMD F59 PHI leads train 506 north between Portland and Seattle. UP 8993 is seen again entering Napavine with an empty garbage train. On the other side of the town's only crossing, Amtrak 11 reaches the top of the hill as it crests the highest point on the Seattle sub, a modest 459 feet above sea level. A high green shows on Main 1 near the Rogers Road grade crossing at milepost 60.6, and a nearby defect detector announces an approaching southbound.
BNSf detector, milepost 57.9. Main 1, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 344 out.
The grade here reaches 0.95%, the steepest on the subdivision. The train meets a heavy grain shuttle led by BNSf 5538. The rear GE screams by in dynamics as the train heads downgrade toward Chehalis. Chehalis started life as a railroad town when the NP built its line north from Kalama to Tacoma, and remains so today. A former Chicago and Northwestern GE is on the point of a UP local as it passes the old Chehalis Depot. North of Chehalis, the Centralia Union Depot was built in 1912 by the Northern Pacific. Today it is owned by the city of Centralia and served by Amtrak's Cascades and Coast Starlight. The depot handled over 25,000 passengers in 2016, and with 2 additional Cascades trains scheduled to be added by the end of 2017, that number may increase. It's 9:13 a.m. and Amtrak number 501 appears through the thick fog as it comes to a stop at the depot. This gives us another look at cab car number 90250, which has been painted in Seattle Seahawks colors since late 2016. After a quick stop, the southbound Cascades resumes its journey to Portland. Centralia is rich in railroad history and once was a crossroad for 4 major main lines: Union Pacific, Milwaukee Road, Great Northern, and Northern Pacific. Today, it is home to the Puget Sound and Pacific, which interchanges with the BNSf and UP. More garbage containers decorate the yard at Centralia. Garbage is trucked here and transferred to rail for the Roosevelt landfill. A GP39-2R pulls a cut of these cars toward the south end of the yard. Centralia is home to Washington's only coal-fired power plant. Located just east of town, it went online in 1971 and can produce 1,340 megawatts of electricity. Most of the coal used to come from the nearby Centralia coal mine, which closed in 2006. For the meantime, it burns Powder River Basin coal. At the time of this production, it is slated to be shut down between 2020 and 2025. Due east of the power plant, the highest mountain in the Cascade Range, Mount Rainier, rises 14,411 feet above sea level. The dormant stratovolcano is the prominent landmark of western Washington. Returning to the main line, Amtrak 11 heads south on Main 1 between Bucota and Wabash. At this point, the southbound Coast Starlight is in between station stops at Olympia and Centralia. Just south of the crossovers at Tenino, a clear signal pierces the pre-dawn dark at milepost 45. This morning, a steady stream of trains are traveling in both directions on the Seattle Subdivision, and it isn't long before a headlight appears from the south. As the nighttime grain shuttle continues north through Tenino, another headlight announces a southbound in a continuing parade of steel wheels. The same stretch of track is seen on this August visit, closer to the crossovers at Tenino. BNSf 7008 North takes a manifest train toward Tacoma. The train will be crossing over from Main 1 to Main 2. The Centennial Amtrak station serves the community of Lacey and nearby Olympia, Washington's capital city. It appears as Centennial, milepost 32.2 on the railroad timetable. A southbound UP garbage train passes the depot en route to Arlington, Oregon. We get our first view of the Puget Sound from a bank above the grade at Nisqually. The ever-present noise of Interstate 5 traffic nearly drowns out Amtrak 506 as it passes milepost 24.1. In the coming miles, passengers aboard this train will enjoy a beautiful view of the Puget Sound on what is known as the Point Defiance line before arriving at Tacoma. Right behind Amtrak, BNSf 5837 leads a northbound empty coal train, which has just serviced the Centralia power plant we showed you earlier. It will return east over Stampede Pass en route to the Powder River Basin in Wyoming for another load of black diamonds. Down at track level, Tacoma Rail's Lakeview spur heads off to the right of the main line. This will be the new Point Defiance cutoff line all Amtrak trains will soon be taking into Tacoma, bypassing the Sound. In October of 2017, Train 507 passes the soon-to-be new alignment at Nisqually. The following day, we caught the same train in a meet with the BNSf grain shuttle. North of Nisqually, the scene is bathed in warm autumn light, while the Puget Sound enjoys an Indian summer. A high green shows on Main 1, promising a southbound. BNSf 6266, a GE ES44C4, leads a former Burlington Northern EMD SD70 Mac on the point of a manifest. As the train curves out of view, it crosses over Interstate 5 between Olympia and DuPont. Welcome to Puget Sound, an inlet of the Pacific Ocean stretching for 100 miles north of Olympia to Deception Pass. Made up of several marine waterways and basins, the Sound has an average depth of 450 feet, making it suitable for marine traffic. From the sands of Salters Point Beach, a ferry departs Steilacoom for Anderson Island. Hauling passengers and automobiles, it makes the round trip nearly every hour. It also makes daily runs to nearby Ketron Island, which has a modest population of less than 20 at last count. A classic ferry, the Olympic, is moored there in retirement, sitting aground at low tide. The Seattle Subdivision follows the shoreline for several miles before entering the Nelson Bennett Tunnel at Tacoma. BNSf 6201 leads a northbound grain shuttle toward Steilacoom, in this scene from an old rundown marina at Salters Point. The long afternoon shadows begin to grow at Salters Point as we move to a pedestrian bridge in time to catch southbound Amtrak 507 heading toward Eugene. Right behind the train on Main 2, BNSf 8517 leads a short military train for nearby JBLM. JBLM refers to the joint Fort Lewis Army and McCord Air Force Base, which merged in 2010. Making good time out of Tacoma, Amtrak 11 crosses a small bridge between Steilacoom and Salters Point Beach. In 1854, Steilacoom became the first incorporated town in what we know today as the state of Washington. In a short time, its port was the busiest in Puget Sound, due in part to the Fraser Gold Rush in what is now British Columbia, Canada. In the distance, the Narrows Bridge can be seen connecting Tacoma with the Kitsap Peninsula, and the ever-present Steilacoom Ferry making its hourly runs to and from Anderson Island. The Northern Pacific acquired property along the waterfront here in 1910. This required the demolition and removal of many beachfront vacation homes to make way for steel rails. Some of these buildings from the 1850s survive today after being moved into town. While the docks remain busy with vessels coming and going, a northbound oil train passes Steilacoom in the last minutes of daylight. The next morning, UP 8993 heads north on trackage rights with another Seattle-bound garbage train. UP trains traverse the Seattle sub as far as Reservation at the north end of Tacoma Yard. Their line parallels the BNSf to a point south of Seattle, where the two railroads again meet. While the UP continues north on Main 1, BNSf 7250 follows suit on Main 2. Amtrak 516 for Vancouver, BC heads north on a summer afternoon. The Talgo set passes the control point of West Tacoma and crosses Bridge 14 over Chambers Bay, about 1 mile north of our location. We will show you this very unique drawbridge in a moment. While waiting for a southbound out of Tacoma, a tug catches our attention as it tows a barge south along the Salish Sea. Another name for these inland waters, coined in 2009 by the U.S. Board on Geographic Names. Puget Sound not only refers to the waterway, but also the surrounding region, including Olympia, Tacoma, Seattle, and Everett. It is the second largest estuary in the United States behind Chesapeake Bay. A headlight appears as UP 8625 South rounds the curve near the Chambers Bay Golf Course and heads for Pioneer and the crossing of Bridge 14. A broadside view of Bridge 14 shows this unique structure, also known as the Chambers Bay Bridge. We see the silhouette of Amtrak Train 509 for Portland on this late August evening. A few minutes behind Amtrak, UP's trash train for Arlington, Oregon, affectionately named the Seagull, slowly crosses Bridge 14 in the afternoon sun. The Chambers Bay Bridge was built in 1914 by the American Bridge Company of New York and is the only remaining example of a Strauss direct lift bridge in the United States. The unique shape comes from the two counterweight arms, which are linked directly to the span. As opposed to using towers and cables, the counterweights rotate down to lift the span directly. The 103-year-old bridge is still fully functional and stands as a monument to the engineering genius of Joseph Strauss. The only other direct lift bridge of this type in North America is found at Prince George, BC. The train's remote-controlled DPUs disappear from view as evening comes to the Puget Sound. Warm summer evenings are not to be missed in this beautiful part of the Pacific Northwest. UP 8253 leads an evening stack train through Steilacoom on its northbound journey along the Seattle Sub. The nighttime stack train continues its shoreline trek toward Nelson Bennett, and the Steilacoom ferry again returns with motorists and passengers from Anderson Island. Operated by Pierce County, ferry departures begin at 4:45 a.m. most days and can run as late as 11 p.m. during the summer months. As soon as the ferry is securely docked, motorists begin shuffling onto the pier in a scene that repeats every hour. As for us, another day of rail fanning has come to a close. On a bright October morning, we move to the pedestrian overpass located near the Chambers Bay Golf Course. The easily accessible bridge gives us a perfect view of the tracks just north of the crossovers at Pioneer. BNSf has a maintenance spur at this location just north of Bridge 14. A diverging clear shows on Main 1 at Pioneer, as the BNSf dispatcher has Amtrak 11 lined up to cross over from Main 1 to Main 2. Continuing north along the Sound, Titlow Beach is located just south of the Narrows Bridge and is known as the best sunset watching spot in Tacoma. Add to that, it is a great train watching spot as well. BNSf 5400 leads another grain shuttle toward the busy Tacoma yard. Crossing to the west side of the Narrows opens up an entirely new view from Steilacoom to the Nelson Bennett Tunnel, about 10 miles of railroad in all. We wake up to a cloudy morning, which on the Puget Sound is nothing unusual. While a local fisherman tries his luck in the Narrows, a northbound grain train heads for Nelson Bennett. It will wait for Amtrak 500 to pass before entering the single-tracked tunnel. This section of track is prone to slides from winter storms blowing in off the Pacific. Mudslides have closed the main line on numerous occasions and are one of the reasons Amtrak trains will be diverted to the Point Defiance cutoff. The main reason is the bottleneck created by the section of single track. Although the new line is steeper with grades near 3%, it takes a more direct line south out of Tacoma, a benefit that'll not be lost on increasing commuter traffic. Within a few minutes, AMTK 198 leads Amtrak 500 through Nelson Bennett. The train disappears into the 4,391-foot-long Nelson Bennett Tunnel No. 2. The tunnel curves to the east, emerging at Ruston, bypassing the narrow tip of Point Defiance. On a warm summer's evening, UP's Seagull exits the tunnel and passes under the Narrows Bridge. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge is a pair of twin suspension bridges that reach 5,400 feet across the Narrows. The far span was built in 1950 and the other in 2007. They replaced the original bridge nicknamed Galloping Gertie, which collapsed into the Sound just a few months after it was built in 1940. It is said that the largest octopuses on Earth live in the wreckage of the old bridge. The north end of the Nelson Bennett Tunnel is mostly hidden in a small cut near the shorter Ruston Tunnel 1. A short southbound approaches. Originally double-tracked, the second main line was removed and the track realigned through the tunnel to gain enough clearance for stack trains. We are distracted for a moment by a nearby doe who seems to have a taste for blackberry leaves. Being a city deer and native of Tacoma, she is only mildly concerned about our presence as she forages for food above the railroad right-of-way. Focusing on the deer, we almost miss our next train. BNSf 1005 North brings oil cans into Tacoma. A pair of Canadian National EMD SD70M-2s are tacked onto the rear of the train, which has a destination north of the border. Double track resumes again at Ruston, just north of the 321-foot tunnel. While a grain train holds on Main 2, a southbound Talgo heads for the tunnel, just under 2 months from switching to the new cutoff. BNSf 6837 North heads through Ruston with an empty garbage train. The rails parallel Commencement Bay. This inland seaport was dubbed the City of Destiny, since it was chosen to be the western terminus of the Northern Pacific. When the bay was connected with the railroad, Tacoma's motto became, "When rails meet sails." The North Star, an Orca-class vessel, enters Commencement Bay loaded with trailers from Alaska. It routinely makes the 1,600-mile journey via the inside passage between Tacoma and Anchorage for Totem Ocean Trailer Express. The city gets its name from nearby Mount Rainier, which once carried the name Tahoma, or Tacoma. Today, it is the second largest city on the Puget Sound, behind Seattle. The Port of Tacoma is one of the most active commercial ports in the world, with rail service handled by Tacoma Rail, BNSf, and UP. The Seattle Subdivision is again triple-tracked from Davis to 21st Street, past the Temco Commencement Bay Grain Export Terminal. An SW1200 number 175 grabs a cut of grain hoppers, while an ocean-going vessel is being loaded in the background. Out in the bay, the North Star gets assistance from a tug as it nears the port. Hearing something coming, we turn to catch BNSf 5759 with another Powder River Basin coal train for Roberts Bank, BC. The Northern Pacific arrived in Tacoma from Kalama in 1883. The current yard still contains a turntable and services both cars and locomotives. UP trains leave the Seattle sub at the north end of the yard at Reservation, milepost 38.4X. The junction is underneath Interstate 5. Locals and yard jobs are always busy here, and it is nice to see units in Burlington Northern colors still earning their keep. A northbound grain shuttle led by BNSf 6893 enters Tacoma for a crew change before continuing north to Auburn. The monotonous string of red BNSF grain hoppers have garnered the nickname earthworms by rail fans. Their uniformity makes white legacy hoppers really stand out, like this one with the classic Great Northern Herald. Right behind the grainer, BNSF 8246 enters the yard on the point of a coal drag. Not far from the yard, construction is underway on the new Point Defiance cutoff. A new double-track bridge replaces an old Milwaukee Road structure through town, and work on a new depot is underway. Looking railroad north, a new signal bridge has been installed and will soon be in service. Departing Tacoma, the Seattle sub runs in a southeast direction toward Puyallup. A northbound Sounder commuter train heads for the nearby station. BNSF 5137 leads a southbound stack train through the scene. A pair of remote-controlled DP units are in dynamics as the train slows to enter Tacoma. BNSf 3782 takes a manifest north of a private road crossing at milepost 34.8X. Right behind the manifest, a track geometry testing train catches us by surprise. Enjoying the evening light, we decide to wait for one more southbound before moving on, and end up with our cover shot. Puyallup is located at milepost 31.9X. The X designation applies to mile markers between Seattle and Tacoma. It is a stop for Sounder commuter trains, while Amtrak's Cascades blow right through at track speed, which is 79 miles per hour. Train 506 races north. A few minutes later, Sounder Train 921 pulls into Puyallup, while the station agent and transit security man the platform. Another Sounder commuter station exists at Auburn, just north of BNSF's Auburn Yard. This is the junction with the former Northern Pacific line over Stampede Pass, which BNSF uses to route empty unit trains back east. One such train is approaching from the north. BNSF 4568 has around 110 grain empties in tow, and it has a diverging clear at Rainier to head east. Another legacy car has made its way onto this train, this time sporting the BN Herald. It symbolizes the merger of many of the key players in the building of this line, including the Great Northern, Northern Pacific, and Spokane, Portland, and Seattle, along with the CB&Q from the Midwest. The signal bridge at Auburn North shows a flashing yellow on Main 1, while Amtrak Train 507 approaches from the north. Looking back at the yard, the headlight of a northbound grain train appears in the distance. Standing on the Sounder platform, we catch BNSf 9700 North passing by at less than 10 feet away. For safety's sake, the cameraman walked away after framing this shot. It is very dangerous being this close to a moving train, especially at 50 miles per hour. A classic Northern Pacific depot has survived at Kent, 15 miles southeast of Seattle. Passenger trains go by daily, but only the Sounder stops at a new facility 2 blocks to the north. Continuing north of Kent, UP and BNSF tracks meet again at Black River, milepost 10.0X on the Seattle sub. Here, a local known as The Rocket is handling a special delivery of Boeing 737 fuselages to the nearby plant in Renton. The crew of the local handles the fragile, high-dollar loads very carefully as they make their switching moves. The 737 is the best-selling commercial jet airliner in history, with nearly 10,000 aircraft built and delivered between 1967 and 2017. It won't be long until these airframes fly out of Renton on their own. While the train backs to Renton Junction, we move ahead and catch a clear signal for the junction for a southbound move. The lights of a sounder illuminate the curve as it heads for the Renton line, also known as the Woodinville Subdivision. The triple-track main line continues north past Boeing at milepost 6.6X to Van Asselt, parallel to Boeing Field. A northbound sounder takes commuters to Seattle. A short time later, Amtrak 513 heads south. UP 8769 North heads for Argo Yard, just south of Harbor Island and downtown. It meets the BNSf 5103 South. Which in turn meets Amtrak 500 North in a three-way meet. From the shore of Brainbridge Island, Mount Rainier appears at first glance to be the only visible feature on the far shore. Yet the sound that reverberates across the water, bold and deep as the Puget Sound, speaks of something alive and immense. Just as a Salish sea drifts into the Earth's shadow, the city of Seattle appears. With over 704,000 residents, Seattle is the largest city in Washington, as well as the Pacific Northwest. Its first industry was logging, and it grew through the Alaska Klondike Gold Rush and became a major shipbuilder during the First World War. One of its most prominent landmarks, the Space Needle, stands 605 feet high and was built for the 1962 World's Fair. Even more impressive is Harbor Island, the largest artificial island in the world when it was built in 1909. Still immense today, it covers 350 acres and is home to mountains of overseas shipping containers. A public viewpoint on Southwest Spokane Street Bridge gives us this perspective of the waterfront. Tugboats are moored at Pier 23, and a pair of container ships are being loaded and unloaded nearby. It's the same story at berth 2, where large gantry container cranes load the ship Costco America. The 1,145-foot-long vessel sails under the flag of Panama. She is docked near the BNSf Stacy Street Yard, south of downtown. It's just after 9 p.m. on the corner of 2nd and 4th Avenue. We have arrived at our final destination of King Street Station. Situated in the Pioneer Square neighborhood just north of CenturyLink Field, where the Seattle Seahawks play, the 1906 depot served both Great Northern and Northern Pacific until the creation of Amtrak in 1971. Today it handles Sounder commuter trains, Amtrak's Cascades, the Empire Builder, and Coast Starlight. It also sees the seasonal Rocky Mountaineer excursion train from Canada, known as the Coastal Passage. This marks the division point between the Seattle Sub and the Scenic Sub, which continues north to Everett, then east over Stevens Pass to Wenatchee. Just north of King Street Station, the BNSF main line enters Tunnel 17, which takes the railroad under the city for nearly a mile. Peering down at track level from the sidewalk, a nighttime double-stack train heads north for Everett. Our final train of the day. Amtrak 14, the northbound Coast Starlight, arrives at King Street Station at 10:56 p.m. The train is wrapping up its 1,377-mile run from Los Angeles. Tomorrow morning at 9:35 a.m., it'll begin its southern trek back to Southern California as Amtrak 11. The first 177 miles of the trip will cover the many places we've just seen on BNSF's Seattle Sub. We hope you've enjoyed your tour of this busy piece of railroad with its fine mixture of industry and scenery. And we look forward to returning again to this always changing scene. Until next time, thanks for watching.